Am I just switching it off and leaving it there, or?
Yeah, just leave it there and I'll pick it up tomorrow. Thank you.
Right.
See you later.
Bye.
Do you know how many we're supposed to be?
How many?
Yeah.
There's normally quite a lot of us.
Varies from week to week.
20, 25.
20 plus, I'd say, but depends on what's going on. There's definitely one of the lab students sending her apologies. She's got a meeting. She can't make it. So.
Yes, okay.
That's right.
When you think you're all here, but you see it's 5:30.
Yeah.
Oh yes, well it's counselling actually. I said I'd email it. I couldn't remember what the second name was, so I had to look it up and ask him. Luckily I still had downloaded something. It's good. You know about Dropbox. I've never had to do that before. I do that at home, so just a couple of things. And what's the stuff is there? Something like a computer. It's not in the cloud or something. And that's not USB. Sure, but I choose all the paper as a copyright. So I'm also guilty about it. And also, you just drag it across the keyboard. And then it started disappearing. So I suppose that's a couple of things disappeared. Well, yes, I tried. When you get it, it's, I just haven't noticed its own little box up
Johnny earlier, he had a headache. He just It's kind of a cold wall or something.
Is it there?
Yes.
That's something the same last week. So,
Very enthusiastic.
okay.
Yeah, we can say about
So I did that. Kind of went out and then I took it and then
Oh.
You can say like that. Oh no, just wait.
Do you think, is there anybody else missing or?
Emma, she's kind of gone home
Okay.
so she's not going to.
Sophie at the meeting?
What about George and there's a few people missing that they may not. I know George is buried, so maybe
I think it's working to come.
Mark. Is the other map students.
I bought a cup of tea from Starbucks, and then I thought I'm going to steal an empty cup and splash milk and make another tea. So I'm sure they won't notice and dent in their pockets. it to what else I can remove those.
Think about it, yeah.
It's pretty good. So I like to keep it out. Nice.
So you're on
The words there.
I'm going to claim ownership of anything else if I start thinking it out. Oh, it's mine. I'll just clarify this, it is mine.
That's my notes from last week, so it must have been. It's a bit weird. Cool. Thank you
Strange.
for telling me that.
So,
Yeah. If you close the door, then. Good evening. My name is Mattia, if you didn't know. Johnny told me that he read last week, the conceptual technology of Heidegger, and you sort of got it. Sort of, or got it. And then today we should have started looking at the notion of discourse in Foucault archaeology knowledge. But we can bridge the two and sort of retake Heidegger a bit. But rather than I just giving you a summary of the text, what made sense and what is completely obscure? Because Heidegger can be completely obscure as his language. There are three or four words or concepts, one of the same thing for him that return. One is enframing, one is poiesis, and then around these you might have revealing and concealing, coming forth. Can you relate them and see how they stand in front of each other at all?
I think it was something, it was the setting up of the discourse that I didn't quite follow too well.
From Heidegger.
Yeah.
Okay, now the setting up a discourse, which is something that in the seminars with Johnny keeps returning as a question and the object of study, is the problem for Heidegger in the terms that he's saying there is a movement which is coming forth. Although he keeps speaking of men, say humans, are called, challenged by this coming forth to react, to somehow interact with that. And this relationship takes a shape or takes a form. And that form, which in this text is called enframing, that we can unpack that in a moment, is a discourse. Discourse is a term that comes from Foucault mostly, but Foucault draws, interprets Heidegger, so the relationship is direct and, if you like, mutual, although they were not contemporaries. The discourse is not simply what is the realm of a speech, but a number of marking points or dimensions for moving and acting and thinking. Did you try to read at all the new text for today? You see, it speaks about how you study history and how you organize the data of history. And it speaks about a number of presuppositions. He calls them in-reflexive or unreflexive continuities, something that is assumed and accepted and is not questioned. Now, this something that is accepted without being questioned is the discourse, the horizon within which one lives in, acts in, creates him. I'll try to make references to art because it will become far clearer if we look at it like that. But so discourse is not only a speech-related environment. Is a conceptual environment. Is a set of categories. I had prepared a number of. I don't know if you ever heard of the pataphysics, but that will work as a game too. If you think, when you say to somebody, I am an artist, what's generally the first comment you get? Or the first question you reply? We all have that.
Yeah.
That is a sort of horizon that is drawn around art. Is a totalizing horizon. It makes out of art all the multiplicity of things that can fit under the umbrella of this name. Just fixes it like that. And therefore he creates a discourse because what can you think of the characteristic of painting? Probably they're endless, but the most immediate or salient.
Was it categories?
Yeah, categories or description. If you have to,
Well,
what's
there's a
painting?
photorealist paper that show it to BMAG at the moment,
Mhm.
if that's counts as a category.
Okay. What else? Just sort them out. I mean, it's not. It's just.
What, like landscape paint type?
What made you call that a painting and this not a painting? If you don't want to call this a painting,
Paint on canvas.
it's a paint on canvas. So already we've got two elements: a paint on the canvas. Now, shape. There were long discussions about the shape of that painting before Christmas in the PhD seminar because its peculiar shape is almost a scenographic section because it can accommodate a life-size body. Now, if you stand next to it, that's a landscape, like scenographic theatre. What else goes with painting, traditionally?
Sculpture.
Sculpture, which is. Sorry, are you supposed to say something?
No.
Frame. So then one can have that everything that is framed becomes a painting, or at least becomes art. So you see how, as soon as something is set and becomes a fixed point, and is no longer discussed, is accepted, it keeps returning and it keeps shaping what we do in art or in other environments.
So Duchamp then uses the gallery as an enframement for the fountain.
Precisely. And also the signature. But the beauty science are using now. So these things, that returns with Manzoni, with science people and science kinds of shit. And then plays even further and makes an upside down plate and titles it Plane of the World, and it's placed in the middle of a field. So the old world becomes the world, and he's somehow appropriating the old planet as his own. So this is, is an example of how a discourse can configure itself. Now, both Heidegger and Foucault question discourse, the structure of a discourse, not because they want to take discourse away and be in an environment that is, so to speak, pure, but precisely the opposite. The problem is to be aware that discourses are in place in order to be able to move through them, use them, alter them when needed. I'm writing very carefully, so I don't know. And in the case of Heidegger, what it says the main element of the discourse of technology is the concept of standing reserve. Did you get more what standing reserve was for him? Like this, if you like, this text is very sort of environmentalist, and it has some elements of, also obviously Heidegger was not on the left, but it has some elements that almost match, almost touch upon concerns that seem far more, very contemporary at the same time. But also, if you think of how much contemporary anti-consumerist or anti-capitalist argument go against the idea of considering nature as a product to be used, product to be sold, it's precisely what is describing here, that the whole world in the modern technology is there to be used for humans. However, because he is a master of flipping the same thing around and upside down several times, he is saying that it is not technology as the technicalities, the gadgets that it is, but precisely the opposite. That technicality, those gadgets, there's all these amazing, the expression used here is contrivances. All the devices of contemporary technology can happen precisely because they happen within the horizon, the epistemological dimension of standing reserve. And I believe that this is very important, both obviously in itself, but if you relate it to art, you can immediately shift it to the relation, for example, art market. Do you see the link?
So art stands in reserve for the art market to deploy for their own kind of devices.
Normal. It's
Just the same way Heidegger describes a magazine standing in reserve, that opinions that are preloaded into a magazine stand in reserve for the population to consume and then take those opinions on as what the government wants them to have.
Yeah, but if you, for example, think of the late 60s land art movement, there was a rejection of the frame of the art space as the place for art, and coupled with a rejection of the capitalist system that would reduce all art to commodity. So a number of artists took their work, or rather took themselves working outdoors and made things that were part of the landscape, therefore it could not be bought or sold. So, and this brings us to Foucault problem, that it has these frames that, as Heidegger says, enframe activities, life, culture, the discourse, and are traditionally homogeneous. Instead, he says they keep being like domino turns. They are segments that open up, break down, split apart. So in this instance, just to follow the land art example, the line of Duchamp is the art object, what is signed by the artist is the art object, what is inside the gallery or the museum or the studio, and they question it by moving it to, by basically no longer making an object but doing an intervention of the landscape, so it becomes environment. Then it sort of intersects with the concerns for capitalist, anti-capitalist approach. So there are two lines that come and become another piece of work, or another mode of working, and then there is feminist critique that arises on these to say that this intervention of the landscape is still a very made phallic appropriation and quashing of something that is otherwise functioning in completely different terms. So there is a third segment, and this is just randomly putting, not putting it together, but I didn't, it's not one example special, right? It's just to show how things align and misalign and split again. This is what Foucault describes in these units of discourse that are always taken as major objects or major frames, major images of what reality is or what culture is, what identities are. And instead, they are far more fluid and constantly moving. If you want to do an experiment of trying to name the media that art uses now, I see you laugh as an idea. It is laughable because there will always be something that remains out. Can you think of? We mentioned painting, we mentioned sculpture, we mentioned land art, which already is a funny medium because what is really the material work? Can you think of anything else?
Performance was the same as land art in that I haven't thought of land art in that sense, but performance art was this breaking away from the gallery situation
As well.
But now, ironically, Tate has the tanks, and they have tanked it in such a way and made it something that you can contain.
So, would you think, or anybody else, that these specific instances where the system, if I think we can safely assimilate Tate to the system, Tate is a very great, big expression of the system of art, that the system is always able to take back under its own enframing whatever form escapes from it. Do you think it is the case?
Yeah.
And in the case of Tate, what would be the enframing that it is constantly reproducing? There isn't one single answer. These are questions that come up for everyone.
Would it be, I guess, they're kind of historicizing these things? Is that they're kind of enframing? They're using the history of things to kind of make this frame.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. Any other? So, and if it historicizes something that is so ephemeral, transient as performance, what happens to it? Where does it bring it back to? I think.
What commodifies it?
Potentially, not immediately, but
Rarefies.
potentially, yes. But also it sort of empties the strength of performance from that attempt that you mentioned of going away from again the object and the art space as something that has to happen within a frame, as if art always, in one way or another, has a frame, has to have a frame. And this is the notion of continuity that Foucault says is very problematic. I mean, he thinks shouldn't be taken as a prepackaged way of prepackaged method for addressing history or, in instance, art. To have an idea that it is always the homogeneous method that is applied and makes sense of whatever happens of things. So, just to go back for a moment to Heidegger, that the enframing, in other texts, Heidegger, the enframing in German is Gestell. Ge is a prefix that means, no, as it says in the footnote, in, taking in, that is active. And stell has an element of positioning in space. In other texts, in the previous lecture where it's worked out this concept, it calls enframing is translated as positionality, or like a distribution of reality, giving a position, and therefore, if you like, even a hierarchy, certainly a value. Then you can see why standing reserve. No, standing reserve becomes far more clear. If the enframing is a position, you're putting something here in front of me, for me. There is a Hegelian undertone here of an object is in itself, for me, and for me obviously becomes precisely what it says, expression. It is in relation to me, and then it takes its meaning in relation to me. And what Heidegger points out here is precisely the problem of understanding all of nature, or all of life, all of that creativity that is inside the expression of poiesis, which is part of the bringing forth, the coming forward, as something that is already somehow boxed. And obviously, what it specifies is that this box does not happen once. It's not a point in time. It keeps returning. It's a way of, it's a method. It's a way of organizing all that we encounter.
Is that history?
Well, it can be history. It can be, in the case of the question concerning technology, nature, and ultimately the relationship with essence. That is a problem for Heidegger all the time. And if to go one step closer to him, he is indeed speaking of the problem of thinking that there is an essence, that approaching experience, art, things, has to answer the question what it is, what does it mean. So approaching reality via an ontological question, while he says that seeking an answer in terms of truth, which would be the ontological question, is somehow misleading because it plays exactly this game of falling into the already structured, already enframed method. Or even better, the method is the ontological question, the existing one. While he says what he is after is not truth, but what is correct. And it opens much more toward an element of performance, if you like. No, because you mentioned it, and it's precisely the problem that this text was written in the mid-50s. Alan Kaproff and his work on performance and happened between the late 50s and early 60s. And he played, I don't know if you're familiar with his work. He wrote a number of short texts as well, but published in a book titled On Blurring the Boundary Between Art and Life. And he distinguishes and then remixes performing as in an act that one does on stage or within a frame, and the notion of performing a task. Or when you ask, how is this, whatever, performing? Now, unfortunately, it's mostly related to investments. But so he performs for himself in front of the mirror in the morning when shaving. But yet he's doing something that is not a performance, it's something he needs to do. It's between quotation real. Any act is a performance. A friend of his who was working along the same line went on to become mayor of a small town upstate New York as a performance. Nobody ever knew about it. And for years he remained the mayor of this city. So there are the blurring of the boundary between art and life, the blurring of the frame was precisely what concerned him in this case. It goes not only one step further than the Champ in questioning what the art object is, but questions the object altogether as the essence of art, and then moves it onto something that is completely ephemeral. So you see that the difference between asking a question whose answer, which answer that requires a true answer, truth as an answer, to taking on a disposition or an attitude which is more addressed to what is correct, how things function, how things move. The problem that the object is always, the object, whatever it is, and this is where we are, is always an issue of depth, and is vertical. And so you have an image or a representation, or whatever you want to call it, and then the object or essence. So my handwriting is horrendous. But is always this idea of vertical, something is below. What you have always has something behind it or something inside it, something underneath it, that is the real thing, the true thing. And this structure is the enframing Andrew speaks about. So when we find ourselves, the other question or the other assumption next to when you're an artist, what you do, you paint, is expecting that an artist means something. How many times one is asked, what does it mean? Or one has heard this question. With the variation, this is about, we all have said that sometimes, know that this is about this, this is about that. While mostly, or hopefully all the time, it is about its own making, the fact that you like to make it, and all the inner relations between whatever you're making, and then the relation that whatever you're making, or performing, or has with what you've done before, what other people have done, how you expect it to be received, how that kind of work has been received or not received in other instances. So it's a set of horizontal.
So that's what's in framing your performance is all these parameters about how you can review previously, how you've reacted to your own work before, and kind of everything that's led you to that moment. That
Is it a question or a statement?
I'm asking if that's what.
It's a question. Yes and no. The expression in framing can be misleading. I see what you're saying. I would say that what you have, your experience of now, it might have been received in previous instances or you expect to be received, is more of an influence than a framing. And framing is, in other authors call it a paradigm. You expect that reality works in a certain way because your image of reality is one and not another. If we use the expression paradigm, it comes from science. Now, modern science, at the time of Newton, thought that you could, all the measurements we had were somehow rough to a certain degree, but you could imagine a pure measuring of reality, and therefore you could have a perfect image of it in the present, and you could retrace it all the way to the beginning of time and project it all the way to the end of time. You could calculate what would happen, because the idea was that there is a level of perfection at the bottom of things. Contemporary science has found that that's not true, or at least the paradigm has changed, and this level of perception is no longer there. There is always a degree of uncertainty. So this is the kind of framing where you have something that is upstream to what you're doing and thinking, and organizes all that you're doing and thinking. To bring it back to art, it happened to me more than once that in an instance of a residency a few years ago, I wanted to organize a number of open conversations regarding the relationship between art and democracy. And I wanted to do it as open as possible to see if it was really possible to have a democratic or horizontal relationship between artist and public. And obviously it was a very ephemeral, very experimental piece of work if it never actually come to be a piece of something, concluded thing. And the people that organized the residency at the end of the month wanted something. And well, there is no something. The whole idea was that this was going to be a conversation. There is no something. There is not even a recording or a video. And we clashed on that because they wanted something. And the thing, the it. At the end of all these, nevertheless, so they participated in the conversation, art produced a tangible something. It could have been scribbled notes, video, whatever, but they wanted something. They could not accept that the work had already taken place, and the piece was the open conversation that happened with whoever walked into the space during that month. That's a form of framing, which in art actually returns rather often. So in the case of Heidegger, the better not in this case, is the one that opened up the whole concept. But he says that the overall frame of Western culture is precisely the organizing nature and the generative move of nature. He speaks about poiesis and physis, which means nature in ancient Greek. Is organized and gathered, harvested, and put, it's stocked for the use of man, or better humans, as if it is not conceivable that nature exists by itself. or what he aims at, that there is a mutual relationship and humans and nature exist and function together, which is what he aims at. So the framing is something that organizes this relationship within very specific gradients. Does make more sense? So that's why the code uses the special standing reserve, because everything is reduced effectively to a commodity. We mentioned it before. And Heidegger has a very romantic image, or in the words at times, of a past that he almost idealizes. He speaks of the river Rhine as something that is now dammed and harvested and channeled to produce electricity, of the woods that are just seen as crop to produce paper, to feed into the media industry and to organize and manipulate public opinion. And it's the same wood where the old farmer who used to work in the past is no longer the same, because the framing of contemporary technology makes it into crop. But what is interesting, what's important, is that it is the same. He says it is the same wood, but the image of it has completely changed. If one wants to make a parallel example with art, before Renaissance, before the stretch of time that was between the Renaissance and the mid-18th century, art was not conceived as we conceive it now. There were different disciplines, but very often it was, with the Renaissance is the first time that we find the image of the artist as an important image. It starts with the recording date of birth and death of the artist. Before, there were decorators, craftsmen that disappeared in the background, and painting was very far from sculpture. Sculpture belonged more to architecture. There was a similar importance given to work in gold and silversmith or goldsmith, which has now become a craft in front of the so-called fine arts. And all these were different lines that developed separately. And then with the Renaissance and arriving in the early modern period, there is somehow a new image of art that takes all these things in together. So it erases all the differences within that would have separated the different crafts, and everything becomes art. There's complete continuity inside this perimeter. But then the perimeter marks complete cut with everything else. It's no longer functional. That's where the notion of aesthetic value comes in, with Winkelmann and some other kind. But without going too far, this is just another example to show how a frame and a boundary can really draw a line around something and never let it go. So it is always perceived and expected to be perceived in specific terms.
Can I check?
Sure.
Does what is considered a standing reserve depend on the particular enframement of time, for example? So whether people are themselves are
no,
considered standing reserve?
For Heidegger, no. For Heidegger, standing reserve is the enframing. Well, yes, I see what you're asking.
If the enframing is a particular view at the time, then what is considered a standing reserve?
No, for Heidegger, the enframing is enframing and standing reserve are one and the same thing. And enframing is that discourse that creates standing reserve.
Okay, as a concept.
As a concept,
Yeah.
yes. And framing, because where this is placed in other works, Heidegger criticizes Western philosophy as that philosophy which, or that approach to reality, which put a structure in between humanity, thought, and reality. If you and that is essentially what they were seeking truth, but by the very method they applied somehow prevented philosophy from reaching truth, because it organized it in a very packaged way, which is this vertical one of trying to look for an essence. If you think of the technology of perspective in painting, and those famous Dürer machines where you made the frame and all the squares and then squaring within the squares, that's hello. That's precisely a method for organizing reality, which then becomes that it is the true representation of reality, but in reality, if we look to reality, we don't see it in perspective as a mathematical version. And more so at the same time is when, in the early 17th century, when at the birth of modern Western science, the idea and the ideal was to reduce everything to mathematics, to be able to have a full mathematization of nature. So everything could be measurable in mathematical terms to precision. And then again, that became another frame or screen in between the attempts to reach reality and reality itself, because you always have a filter of interpretation. The problem is that this filter of interpretation becomes, firstly, is completely pushed to the periphery of our world, to the horizon, so we don't notice it. And then it becomes true. That's the problem Heidegger finds. It says, instead, this is not true. Toward the end of the essay on the classification in technology, he's not rejecting and framing and saying, oh, we have to be a one with nature, big tree hugger or something. He just said there must be an awareness of this to realize that it's a continuous and loose relationship. So nature will not be enframed and reduced to standing reserve as in a commodity, but we realize it's important because it keeps us alive, to reduce it to very plain. I don't know if you read with Johnny other things of Heidegger yet, but he plays a lot with the idea of being as in one distance at existence, space and time, and then it's completely undetermined and infinitive form B, or being with a big B, depending on how you want to pronounce it. It's the same game that goes along. This is one instance, this is one example here today in 2014 in Britain. Of Italian heritage, 20 years around, artists studying philosophy, all the definitions you want to answer it and more. What is called Dasein, being there. You're here now in the present with all the layering that make up. And in relation to an assumed abstract essence, a completely indefinite form of existence that is in itself completely unreachable, because if you want something that has got no definition, it's like killing an onion, take away all the descriptions of it, you're left with nothing. So it's a game between the two that circulates for him. And the same happens if you think that I, as this being, either human being or anything in between, because everything participates of existence, has a root or an essence, the hardcore object somewhere, that's the enframing he describes. But if you think that when you reach this core, you actually found nothing because you stripped away all the possible characteristics of it, so you have a pure and plain existence, completely ungraspable. But indeed, he calls what does it being is nothing in the end. And then precisely because it's nothing, you say nothing is, then it flips back. But you don't go there, it becomes very abstract. But the idea is precisely the fact that there is the assumption that every moment in space and time, every instance of existence, whether it could be me, the bottle, the book, the school, or the political situation now, has a root and a base in something that is essential and pure, in solid.
Is that route also in space and time? As far as
No.
light is concerned?
No. That's a problem.
It's an abstract.
That's the abstract problem that all of philosophy was so outside. I mean, in other moments it would have been God, which is outside space and time. And he says that that's the main problem, thinking that we are rooted in something so solid, and there is a complete clear-cut separation, while it is a continuous flowing of one into the other.
This is the small b being, like the skin or the surface on the surface, and if you take it away, the surface is no longer its surface because it's just the inner surface again.
Yes, very stretched. If you consider it that when you take this surface away, you got another one, but you never reach these underneath. In other words, if we go back to the notion of standing reserve, of taking nature as standing reserve. If we see a fantastic forest, and one tells you, this is this much worth of firewood for all the fireplaces in Britain for this winter, so everybody can have a cozy Christmas as it's nice, and one would almost recoil from it. To say, how can you think that the forest, new forest or whatever it is already calculated and chopped down into small blocks, commodified in these terms? But if you take away that first image, which is certainly easy to take away, then you start saying, well, then what is the forest? What's the limit of the forest? Or what, is this forest the same as the other forest? Is it different kind of trees? Is it oak forest? Is it pine tree forest? You still always have all this layering that kind of down. Or is it private or public forest? It goes down, and ultimately you never get to the essence of it. Unless you follow Heidegger move one step further, where the essence is not really an essence, but is a continuous flowing around of the two. So I am in relation to the forest, and the forest is there for me, and I am through it. So you dwell on this threshold. But the reason why this is interesting is precisely because when you move these to art, it opens up several questions that otherwise remain blocked or silenced. In a way that in the text he speaks of poiesis. Did you pick up on poiesis, which is a creative move, and he puts it next to physis? As I said before, physis is the name and concept for nature in classic Greek. And they're both, Heidegger says, bringing forth, giving shape to things. And therefore they're very creative. But if this movement is coming forth toward us and proposing itself for us, it is enframed into a standing reserve, into a commodification of the art piece, or into a commodification of the figure of the artist as in someone who is going to become a celebrity. Or in, I don't know if you've seen the movie that is just out now of the Coen brothers, Inside David Lynn. It's not a great movie, but it's a story of a folk singer that fails miserably and in the end tries not to be a singer anymore and can't even do that because he cannot even get another job. But at a certain point, he argues with his sister and he says, well, what should I do? Just get a job and simply exist as if there would be no meaningful life outside of making of art. But, sorry, I lost my track. Yes, but that simple existence is precisely what the problem is here, because the commodification of the image of the artist is that he's got to be successful to the point that he even himself can even not be content with playing music because he likes to play music. It has to be something that makes money, that needs recognition. Do you consider yourself artist? Do we consider ourselves artists? If we don't exhibit, if we don't get recognition, or public recognition, for example, is a requirement for the figure of the artist.
I personally don't think it is. So it's a requirement for staying alive as an artist.
Mm-hmm.
But
You would be happy to work because work gives you pleasure, for example. I am.
I
There
mean,
isn't
if you're thinking in terms of the way you've been talking about sort of materialising being or whatever,
yes.
then whether you sell it or not is, I suppose it's a matter of definition, isn't it?
Yes, but the matter of definition, from following what Heidegger and Foucault say, is not something that is just left to someone's opinion. And your opinion is, yes, I could live with that, and her opinion could be, no, absolutely not. There must be popular recognition. To Heidegger, and then even more so for the interpretation of Foucault, that matter of definition becomes a dimension of the reality we live in. And it is an iron logic.
As I think this bringing forth,
Mm-hmm.
which seems to be sort of bringing forth of something, a nothing into being,
Mm-hmm.
and
Absolutely,
into
yes. No, it's very
material.
correct. Yeah.
Is that the whole story, or does it have to be something that can be communicated to others?
I believe they are. When I say I believe, is because it's not immediately in Heidegger's argument this step of communication, but it is not. It's a good question. It's not straying off. I would say that they are one and the same thing, because the bringing forth and the and being challenged, as it Foucault expression uses, by this bringing forth and this emerging. To dwell, to live on the threshold between the revealing that is always concealing the essence of this thing, is a process of giving shape to things. Therefore, the giving forth of nature, the giving forth of the poetic work of the artist is giving shape, and therefore, yes, he's putting out and communicating. I would say so, yes. Does it make sense? It's quite a good point. Brought up.
So it's not necessarily bringing forth from nothing.
That's the bringing forth from nothing is the problem Heidegger is pointing out. He's not talking about a barrier beyond which you don't see, and somehow fishing there, plop, rub it out of the hat. Look how good I am. Is that there is no barrier. There is whatever there is, and it's coming towards us. Reality is here for us. We are in it. There is no way to deny that. But how we are in it and how we organize it, give it names, structure it, put it in distributions, decide what is the value of one thing and what's the value of another, is shaping this coming forth, this bringing forth. So we have, according to Heidegger, this coming of reality towards us challenges us to respond. You can't plainly sit there, be. You do things. Probably even if you don't need to work, you still do things to encounter and to shape all the stimuli that are coming. All the fact that reality is out there, the fact that tomorrow morning there's going to be light again and you get out of bed. So in these continuous coming toward us and us being called to react to it gives a shape to things.
And is it in the reaction that there's a poiesis?
Yes, it's reciprocal. The poiesis is the reaction, but it's not the reaction is not only from one side at this point. The coming forth, we could say that from the essence of what was once the essence, and the reaction from the moment in time and play and space are the poetic move, the creative one. And I think it's important to constantly relate these to art making. Whether you are experimenting or have a clear idea of mind of what you want to do, rather quickly you find that what you're working with, whichever material, whichever medium, no matter how traditional or experimental or ephemeral, has its own rules. And you have to play by those rules as much as you're trying to apply your own intention. Because I believe we're moving there. Sometimes one uses techniques or media that are mastered long enough, personally, maybe even historically, so that it is a bit easier to get to what you want. But that's a big problem. Sometimes one just ventures into something entirely new and has to wait and try to understand how to react to that. What kind of materials, media are you using? How many people are painting? One? Only one? Two? How many people are working with video? No. One. Film, cinema? Would it be the same as video, for example? There's already bifurcation, yeah. How many are working with 3D things, objects? Right, a few more. Are you all sculptures? Or it's more a ready-made environment? Or something else together? How would you call it?
Just put random things together.
Okay, and how do they go together?
I don't think it's sculpting as such. It's just ready-made.
It's ready-made. And how do you decide that one thing goes together with another one?
I just force them together and then I think, well, does that look right? And yes, then I leave it and then I'll take it apart and do something else.
Okay, and I understand what you're saying. I'm just trying to pull out something more. But what makes it look right, or what makes it? Can you give us an example of what you put together?
Textiles and wire. Well, at the moment I'm working with patterns, so if the pattern's right, then that's what would be right in the work itself for me to think.
And the textiles wise, it means that you weave the wire into the textile?
Ish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So would you say, maybe I'm entirely wrong, I'm projecting a very plain image of it. Would you say that the fact that the textile is already weaved and the wire, I assume it is a metal wire, is by some degree of analogy looking like a thread? But the textile calls for the wire to go into it in a certain way.
Yeah.
So you could have wrapped the textile up with a wire and choke it like something entirely different. But, so you responded to what you had in a way.
Yeah.
Probably it's not the only one, but it was a way to respond to what you had. So the textile did not allow you, or not presented you with an infinity of possibilities. It already had its own options. And this is a kind of response that the coming forward requires. So it's what in this environment of artistic experiment. Because otherwise one thinks, oh, the artist is the genius that is in touch with some fantastic work that is not open to the rest of us, and is creative, literally creates from nothing. But I don't think at all that we create from nothing. We create from a lot of layering, and we play with those layerings, and all the rules that happen among the layering. And this goes much further. Obviously, there's not only this that you brought is a, between quotation, a material example. But those of you who work, just know of Andre, you work in media, so modifications, probably you have less material objects in your hands and more something more ephemeral.
Yeah, it
probably
seems to be somewhere between photographs and objects.
And objects as well, so you're going in that direction. Are you working with music?
Yeah, I think music's a lot more like that. I mean, a lot of people, like you were saying, a lot of people would say it would be you just see that the musician's a genius, or they just hear something. There's a lot to do with the relationships between the two sounds, or more than one sound, and the kind of silences in between that create these relationships that play with each other. But there is sort of, when composing, you will trial and error for a long time as well, and bringing in
When
new
you
sounds as well.
compose, I know nothing of music, and I am a bit out of tune when I sing, so. But when you compose, as the image I have traditionally on paper, you compose directly with an instrument, on whatever instrument you're using.
Or like, yeah, but then also the computer as well.
On the computer.
So that's a bit like the paper.
The computer is like the paper, okay.
A little bit.
So,
but it's also like the instrument as well.
There is an element of coding in abstract beforehand.
Yeah.
But then it's
Then it's got translating it.
and the translation changes in endless times.
Yeah, because it's never really, because you'll start with, particularly composing electronics or music, you start with possibly playing it on like a keyboard or something, but then there's a lot more to like putting in with like effects, like fades and editing and mastering. It can take longer than to actually just write what notes you're going to play.
Because in this regard, I remember once I met two musicians from an experimental place in Holland called Stein, and they came, they were in Greenwich at the time, they came with something that vaguely looked like some DJ contraption, but it was far more complex, and it had endless wires going everywhere and buttons and things. And the play was completely synthetic generated sounds. And then in the end we were talking, and one of them said, an instrument is a set of limitations. And then I translated in my mind, an instrument is a set of dimensions. In other words, an instrument is not a neutral vector that can carry whatever intention you have and make it happen. In itself, already has excluded most possibilities and is giving us a very specific set of options. And this is an instrument that can do a number of things. And these, although it's similar, can make different kind of drawing. You can extend, you can stab something, some material with these. But it already is different. This one, the brush is one step removed. The camera, the wire you're using, and the fabric give us entirely different sets of possibilities to work with. And we are another of those possibilities and dimensions. We are part of this mix. But then framing that Heidegger speaks about would be the expectation, or is the expectation, that instead there is a clear intention and that the material is separate from the artist, and the artist dominates and makes the piece as she really wants. So you see, is the difference between having an image of something before it happens that is constantly applied to instead being in it, with it, and existing and working along with it. But it is a matter of having a predefined identity of what one does and who one is. That is challenged here. And it is not, the problem to Heidegger and then even more so for Foucault in his work, is not criticizing one kind of identity, but is problematizing the fact that identity as a solid, closed concept is used as the main tool of the culture we live in. Because if we go back to the question at the beginning, I'm an artist, what do you paint? It's like putting a frame around the neck of the artist. All artists paint. There you go, and you can't really stray very far from it. All Italians eat pizza, and so forth. But it is a silly, superficial comment, but then you take it one step further, or one more important, and immediately you hit the whole province of gender and sexualities that for Foucault were very, very important when he studied race, or all the ethics. Where do you stop experimenting for medicine? What's human, what's not human? Precisely stemming from the idea of having a fixed a priori image of what reality is.
You're bringing certain moral categories there as well. Is that viewed as all within the same in framing? I mean, what happens to, within slavery, for example, are people still a standing reserve, but then they're not used in a civilized society as slaves? I mean, how does the moral aspect fit in?
Well, I turn it around, not turn it around, but I would approach it with an example. The current image of slavery at the moment, in this century, is that slavery is a thing of the past, and yet it is not. There is plenty of new slavery mixed within the society we live in, not necessarily along a racial divide, maybe along a gender divide, but not necessarily either. Not even along the divide of not being paid at all, and being considered a property. But there are various elements that overlap, mix, and make it a very blurry phenomenon if we look at it through the lens of slavery in the 18th century, for example. If just to start looking a bit more at Foucault, he speaks of continuities in the understanding of and in the interpretation of reality. In this books, it is a text he wrote to explain the method he applied in previous works, where he analyzed the history of the images of culture as in. He was studying, before this, he was studying the passage from Renaissance to modern, and now the modern frame of mind. And framing is a frame of mind. The only frame of mind sounds like a very colloquial expression, but if your frame of mind is that you have to use up everything because everything needs to be consumed, that's precisely. So he wants to write about the method he used, and he describes the problem he saw and how he tried to talk about this in different terms by he individuates that there are continuities that are not visible. He called them unreflexive continuities, and that this has a history as traditionally being approached as a discipline or a science that finds continuity, finds homogeneous areas that where everything is similar, analog to itself. So it's very clear that everything is smooth within those perimeters. And these, in the history of art, these returns immediately there are clear distinctions. The Renaissance, when does Renaissance end or starts? Mannerism, and then when does it become Baroque? You have years at the beginning of the 16th century when some artists are still working in something, their products is still considered Renaissance, or they already become Mannerist. There are already twists of Baroque position and figure. The same artist does the same through his life. And then Baroque music happens later than Baroque painting and then Baroque architecture, mystical Baroque music, while painting had become realistic, naturalist, for example. And then in this century, even more so, we have split of the work of painting, as the work on a specific medium becomes examination of the medium itself, so it becomes, the abstract expression is optical, and then the end of the notion of medium as Rosalind Krauss proposes it. And then parallel to that, you have the tackling of discourses directly. 10 years apart, there are the abstract, sorry, sometimes I get entangled with my own words. Abstract expressionists working on the supposed essence of the medium of painting, the surface, and then pop comes up. Now, I don't know if it's not an important artist, but Rosenquist was a sign painter. He used to paint billboards in America for advertising. And then he took that and moved it into the gallery frame and became art. Rauschenberg, a period Jasper Jones earlier, and then it moves on, and then you get Andy Warhol, the pop. And pop itself, which was Rauschenberg and Jasper Jones, becomes Andy Warhol. So one definition is fluid within itself, and it doesn't last as static. And that's precisely what Foucault brings up. And he says the discourse, instead, is that attitude, that method that thinks or gives us tools to deal only with static things. And he's criticizing that. At the same time, as Heidegger says, I'm not trying to do away with these. This is what it is. And the important thing is to be able to analyze it, recognize it, and realize when it is not as clear and as simple as it seems. Do you see the link between the notion of enframement and the reserve and this attitude of having, he calls them global definitions that take everything in as in a smooth continuity within itself? There is an interesting paragraph here where he speaks about the problems of defining what a book is and what a body of work is. He extends it to, is a book just the book? And then he starts asking two lines of questions. This is very interesting because he speaks of, cancel this. A global history or a global form of identity would want to have a perimeter within which everything is the same and homogeneous. And there is really a perimeter, whether it is in space, a country ends here and it really ends here. On the other side, they are completely different and potentially enemies. Or a historic period begins here, following an Hegelian image of history. Modernity ends with, begins with the discovery of America, 1492, and ends with the French Revolution, 1789. And that's precisely that. There is no chance of blurring over and spilling. And then from 1789, contemporary period began. Obviously, that was his contemporary period. That in itself already was a bit of a fine definition, because one is always in a contemporary period. Foucault instead says, well, this is precisely the problem, because this leaves out plenty of other things that are happening, of other lives, of other things that maybe have begun down here and go across, and maybe even last longer. So, for example, he mentioned you could have the history of the introduction of potatoes. If you've read Günter Grass, the Tin Drum, not the Tin Drum, it's a story of, the Flounder. It's a novel about history through different kind of food and the people who cooked it. And there's a whole chapter about the introduction of potatoes in Germany and how it fed Prussia and became the industrial Prussia that then created an industrial military complex that led to the Germany of the 20th century. And it's just through the history of the introduction of potatoes. Because first they had nothing, and then potatoes gave them plenty of starch to survive on, and they became very productive. It's a grotesque novel, so probably that's a bit pushed, but it's an example. The history of river commercial transportation, that doesn't stay within, it goes before and after the introduction of steam engine, after steam engine to diesel engine, it still lasts now. So you cannot divide it along these, or following these specific marks. Political concern in arts go through painting, performance, installation, photography. You don't have one and only medium that is stuck on them. Or the same issue in images can be found in cinema, in photography, in painting, in drawing. And yet, for the same artist, say this is artist, this is something that happened to me, to friends many, many years ago. They were older and a bit more serious looking than I am. We went to an uptown gallery, and they were interested in buying a painting. And all the paintings, it was Marianne Goodman Gallery, who is a gallery that dealt with most of the conceptual and pop artists, the big names of pop in the early 60s. So it's a very well established gallery. The prices were stratospheric. And the paintings were all in the realm of hundreds of thousands. So this couple, a friend of mine, asked, would you have anything around $40,000 or $50,000? Not that I had the money, but we were playing this game. And the gallery said, oh, well, they wanted a drawing. So there was a line drawn between painting and drawing by the price. So in that case, what we think of the work of one artist, which would have thought as this whole, was somehow slashed by the pound sign somewhere. And this is not even commodifying, or it is commodifying, but it's in a very more subtle way, in a much more subtle way. So the unity of a field, in that case, I don't remember who we were looking at, but it could be anyone, is broken apart. But then, how about all the sketches and the attempts and the failed and botched things that fall out of the body of his or her work? Are they still part of this definition of the work of artist X? Or we have to exclude them because they never left the studio where it was working?
So the same again as the excess that's being excluded from dialectics.
Yes. Yes. Very well put. But even more so, because if Heidegger has a direct link with Hegel for dialectics and the excess and keeping everything in one total smooth definition, for Foucault it becomes an issue where in our present we have contemporary art. If this is 2014 on the 28th of January, contemporary art, the civil war in Syria, the photorealistic show you just mentioned earlier, a crisis that is there but not going away, but not really being presented to us as dramatic as we wanted. All these things are not the same, and they are overlapping, intersecting. And so why I'm showing this because the point that Foucault makes about this is that rather than having a smooth and solid continuity in frames that one puts over history or over reality, he switches from the two concepts in the chapter. He speaks of discontinuities, ruptures, that continuously bifurcate. So he finds that it's far more productive, far more interesting, and it gives much more voice to all those who have been silenced in the homogeneity, in such an homogeneous presentation, to think of moments of disruption, of interruption, where something becomes something else, and retains at the same time something that it was before, and then again, and then again. He indeed, and that's where the seminar probably will go next week, introduces the notion of deterritorialization. Well, even I write a lot about it, but deterritorialization, which is precisely the idea that you do not have a solid identity of something. You have a number of things that are coming together in a certain moment in time and space, but they are moving, they're fluid. And progressively, some keep coming, some stop coming, some new are coming in. So the supposed whole changes over time. it's if this is the famous arrow of time, this point here as the present is not one point and one line. It's made out of the seminar this afternoon, what you were doing today, which is already a longer segment, the whole story of the master going across like this, your partners, the weather, whatever else. And some of these will continue, some of these will stop, some new one might come in. So it's actually a big crowd of things that are ganging up together to create the color of today, or to create the work of art one is making. Is there any of your work in this room? John is sometimes the others. If we pick, and that painting is always a very good example, I think, because it has a number of elements. It is on canvas, so certainly it places itself in the environment of painting. But as I pointed out earlier, it is a very funny shape, so that's already another vector. So first vector is painting. Painting is vector 1. Then we have the dimensions of it, the big rectangle, vector 2. What else would you see in it that stands out?
Collage.
And
There's some collage.
there is some collage, vector 3.
Glitter.
Glitter.
Texture.
Texture, so you would not associate painting with texture in principle. Whoever said it, I don't know. But or would you? I don't know, but it's there. Anything else? Which kind of collage is it?
I don't know, they're different
But they are
ones.
photographs, no? It's
Crocuses, the photographs of crocuses.
they're photograph of crocuses. So there is not any collage. There is an element of photography. I found that the colors recall sometimes some sort of contemporary comics, Japanese little things. But that's my take. And maybe more, and more things. So you see how many, and this is just from one rather simple example, how many things concur to make that surface. And I use the special surface not at random. It is precisely because the point that Heidegger and Foucault want to make is that if we look at it on the side, that painting with the trees and the flowers and the things can no longer be related to one description, one object, one essence, because it is a surface, is a plane where all these things come together, interact, stay together temporarily, plus our take on it, which is always very important. Let's call it, for the ease of things, interpretation, or to use the word of Heidegger, to be challenged by it. That is coming forth to us with all it has. We are here with it, we are in reality, we are thrown into it, and it's coming to us, it's bringing forth or coming forth, and we react to it. And we find a temporary solution for this. Tomorrow maybe with daylight it will look different, or tomorrow we'll have something else in our mind and we'll read that in different terms.
So your encounter with that is the poetic
Precisely,
poiesis.
yes. Can you articulate that a bit more? Because that's a very, very important point.
Well, I guess it's the thing that happens with art, is your encounter with it. And I guess it depends on how you encounter, whether you kind of encounter with prejudice or without prejudice, how you experience it. So your history comes with it as well, your
Yes.
experience.
But if you use the word prejudice, somehow it is, prejudice carries with itself the notion that you could have, because prejudice is negative as a concept.
Well, it's this thing that some people might come to that and expect, have the prejudice that painting is flat. So
Mhm.
to them already that's a problem. But the encounter is still there.
Okay.
So there's a different kind of encounter, I guess, because they expect it to be flat or photorealistic, or that's what I mean by
What do you mean
prejudice.
by prejudice? That's precisely what I meant. That it is true, that it's correct. I wanted an example, but prejudice, nevertheless, sounds to us as a sort of limited view about something. Is a judgment you already have in your mind before you encounter whatever you encountered, but it is not informed enough. This is how it sounds. What Heidegger says, and then what Foucault puts forward, is that it's not something as small or simple as a prejudice, but it is an epistemological category. It is a way of shaping the world. And it has, it can be strictly scientific. So, for example, everything could be mathematized. But somebody brought up the example of races before. One of the non-assumed or never considered issues is that racism is always projected as something that goes from the Wild West toward the rest of the world. We never considered in the Wild West that we could be the object of racism from another culture. And it's, why not? Or there could be racism between other cultures. But since we have assumed culturally to be the center on the top of the hierarchy, then we don't consider the other possibilities as valid according to this parameter. So it's something much more radical than just a prejudice. The prejudice fits in it, but it's much more. I was going to order to find another thing. Yes. So to tackle this, both Heidegger and Foucault, this is very important. Otherwise, one comes away with the fact that they are proposing a different kind of truth. They are saying we actually know better, or at least things have changed, and you can no longer think in these terms. Now the new right way is the other one. While what they are introducing is precisely the fact that there isn't a right way. That there isn't a truth hidden beneath things. There isn't an essence or a meaning, especially in the case of art. I think it is very, very important in ways to. If you disagree or if that it doesn't sound clear to you, please say this. But this is probably the point of the seminar. That in being an artist, in working, making whatever we are making, or in performing, or in playing, all these works bring with themselves different meanings, but at the same time, I like to think of, for example, playing. You play music, but you play as in playing, gaming, doing things in a live way for fun. But are we not working in art because we like it? Is anybody doing it because it is bad? But unless you enjoy suffering and that's a game you like it, we don't do it because of that. We like making it, whatever it is. So immediately that line that has the intention of the artist, the object that is made in the art studio, brought into the gallery and then into the museum or the private collection. That was a famous chain of art production criticized by Duran. You have, I'm spending time with it. I enjoy it. And that changes entirely the idea of what the whole event, phenomenon of art making is. The standing reserve that Heidegger speaks about, the enframing that puts nature there as an object for us, here returns as in, I am not working for the purpose of producing a piece. I am working because I like it. Does it make sense? Do you see this shift? If Heidegger sees that in the conceptual frame opened by contemporary technology, nature is reduced to a commodity, to something that is there for us to use, and it can be stockpiled, accumulated, and then spend it whenever we need it. It's not far actually from Marx's description of capital, as part of Heidegger being on the far right of the Nazi. But if that's what standing reserves means for Heidegger, do you see parallel in the fact that I am working as an artist in order to produce a piece? There is a similar line of functionality of teleology. There is an end to what I'm doing. There is indeed in the text, he speaks of causality at the beginning, the famous 4 forms of causes of Aristotelian origin: final cause, efficient cause, material cause, whatever else. But the point is that there is a cause that somehow is at the end, or a target meaning, a telos, to use the precise word, which is like a cause that pulls toward the completion of whatever we are doing, the end of what we are doing. And instead of what happens is that the end of what we are doing is the doing, is the making of it. Simple text, or does it make sense?
So it doesn't stop, it just keeps going.
Yeah.
Precisely.
Right.
So you think you come to the end, but it just keeps going.
Yes, but also because when you finish making a piece, you don't say, okay, I am done. I'll never make art again. You go back the next day because you like being there, or because that piece called for another idea. There is a new intuition, or you come across a new piece of fabric or a new piece of wire that calls for a new kind of coming together. There are just, I don't want to complicate too much, but the notion of jouissance from psychoanalysis is precisely standing on the same threshold, this funny balance in between things. Well, you do things because you like doing them, not because there is a reason for doing them. And that's precisely the point of working as an artist.
Even that is some kind of telos, because you like doing it.
Yes, okay, but yes and no. Telos is always an end you're working in function of, and it is outside, external to us, and set a priori, set before you start working. Where is the world going? I know it's destined to reach perfection where society is even, there are no more economical differences, no more racial, gender differences, whatever. We are all going to be a utopia. Let me put it like that. Heidegger speaks of destiny instead, precisely in terms of, this text speaks of destiny, if you remember it, as to be destined to be constantly challenged by the fact that reality comes towards us and we have to respond. Like you see, it remains in the present. It doesn't. There isn't a moment somewhere in a fictional or ideal time at the end of time in the future where these will come together and be one thing realized.
So I'm not saying there is no telos; it just keeps coming to you, and
so there isn't.
There's this reaction. The reaction towards this constant.
If you take, fantastic matter here. If the telos would be here at the end, and we are somewhere here along the road, and we got to reach the end. This is the traditional way of putting it. But to follow the intuition you had, is that enjoyment not a form of telos? Would be to say that from here, you just jump back on yourself. So it takes away all this distance, all these because this is external. Who has set this table for us? Not us, because we're not there yet. And the whole point is that also to bring back some sort of, the word will become very delicate, but some sort of presence to oneself or immanence, where you're not in function of something else or somebody else, but you are who you are for who you are.
Is that talking about something completely different than working in a project environment? If you're working on a particular project for a particular client, there is still some sort of mini telos within that process.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
but there are these. This is why it is interesting to read Foucault, because Heidegger is a bit idealistic and or even a bit static in these the relationship he is aiming at. He wants he wants us to realize that the bringing forth and being challenged, or the nature and human are in this mutual relationship that keeps flowing back and forth. But once we have realized that, somehow we have arrived for him. And this is why he's been criticized. And almost he himself, at the end of his life, realized that there was this limit in his argument. Foucault goes one step further and says it isn't simply the relation human nature, man nature, as Heidegger says, or small being, big being. But there is a number of things that keep coming into the present. Those vectors that we just listed to make the example of this painting. And they keep changing. So we are also challenged by the fact that these elements of the present keep evolving, and that even within ourselves we keep evolving. I always thought how interesting it is that I might present myself as I am here today. Already, if I have another pair of glasses, very big and very yellow, I look very different. My broken lens, I can't imagine my teacher ask. But if to that I would add a completely different set of clothes, I would look like a different character. If I would shave my beard, again, these are small things that we take for being superficial elements, literally elements of the surface, which do not impinge on the essence of who I am. But then again, if I would choose to present myself without a beard, dressed in a completely different way, studying something else, not studying at all, and spending all my afternoons watching TV, example, would I still be the same person? Is the biological ensemble of me enough to define who I am, or what I do is also part of who I am? So you see how this problem comes back, and you mentioned the ethical problem earlier. Immediately, where the church tells us that research on staminal cells cannot be done because that's already life. From another point of view, say, well, it's just, a secular thought rejects the idea of a soul, so it doesn't see that as a problem. But you need all the cells plus the history of a person plus the fact that the person has engaged with other people and speaks and thinks and feels to say, no, I want to defend that whole. It's important. The cell is not. Where do you draw the partition line? According to Foucault, it is always a question to ask, and is never a final answer that one gets.
Foucault's talking about history mainly, isn't it? About
yes,
discourse,
yeah.
and it's all about content. I mean, does it sort of generalise over into, I don't know, everyday life? Does he use the same principles to...
Well, Foucault, after this book and around this, in this period, through the 70s and 80s, wrote three major works. One is titled Discipline and Punish, which is a long historical research. You could say it is the root of cultural studies, in a way, where he studies how the image of punishment and next to it of discipline, which somehow prevents punishment, develops from the year 1600, when there was the last European ordeal. There was I don't remember the name, but somebody tried to kill the king of France. The man was captured and was executed with a ritual that lasted the whole day. First they burned the hand with which he stabbed the king, then they cut open his chest and put molten lead in it, and then it goes with wax. And Foucault goes through the whole chapter of this horrendous description of the torture this man has to suffer before he's finally ripped apart by 4 horses. That was what happened up to then. Modern time, for various reasons, you might simply say no longer had use for this kind of punishment. Modern time prefer creating what Foucault calls docile bodies. Individuals that are brought up within the railings, within the tracks of discipline, one way or another. And he brings example on how soldiers are taught to move when they have to load a rifle. Old rifles have been loaded one shot at a time in the 18th century. How children had to step onto the desk and sit when they were in class. How workers had to be using machines in factories, up to sport. And so there is a whole idea of correct, as in right, way of moving and behaving, and wrong. So the punishment somehow fades away, and discipline comes in. That's one word. Then there is a whole history of sexuality. There is the history of madness, where the line of madness was drawn. So yes, he goes into everyday life in very much in detail.
But he's concerned with statements about life, isn't he? He's concerned with, I mean, perhaps I misunderstood this, but his concern with discourse history is about, there aren't any events, nothing happens. It's all about people's statements about what happens.
Well, you're very good that you bring this up. The statements about what happens for Foucault are events. In other words, and it's far simpler than it sounds. The fact that you name something, and you name it right or wrong, sets apart what is right and what is wrong. So organizes the world, gives it a distribution. In this sense, the discourse, which is verbal, names and organizes. Am I answering your question?
Well, yes, the discourse becomes an event, so to speak.
Yes, so the setting up a new discourse is, in the case of the shifting from that kind of punishment to the invention of jail and the introduction of discipline is an historical event where there's a shift between modes of understanding inclusion and exclusion from correct behavior in society.
But when he's coming up with, this business about unities and all the rest of it, coming up with trying to sort of analyse an alternative way of looking at discourse, is he also thinking about an alternative way of looking at what actually happens as opposed to discourse about what happens? I think you're saying there's no difference.
No, but there is no difference because there are two things that are apart but look alike. Is because what happens and the discourse about what happens are the same thing as space and time, as the same thing as being here. We would not be here without space and time. And for Foucault, we cannot be without some form of political distribution. And what the point that they both want to really make is that it is fundamental that we are aware that the distribution is in place. Then they come with, again, that the distribution is not natural, it's not the natural order of things, it's not the only one. The argument that Foucault makes about forms of organizing history, or forms for us of organizing art history of existence, is that they are not true, as in reality is exactly as it is represented by these descriptions, by these words, by these images. Reality is what it is, and comes toward us. We are challenged, to use again Heidegger's language. We are going toward it, we pick up the challenge, and we give it a distribution, an order. If to go back to painting, and I'm not going back to painting because I only know about painting, but because there is, it's the passage, the historical moment they're working on or in, is a moment where the art as the image of reality gives way and finally, or not finally because it was about time, but gives away for good to a number of other ways of working. But just before that, we always saw painting as a background and a figure, and the figure was a person very often, or almost always. So there was, if you now look at it from the side, there is the figure here, person, and the background, and there is a distance. This setup is the one we saw earlier between the being in time and space and its essence. Having a distance between appearance and reality. And then this structure, this details of painting, returns with perspective, the machine of Dürer, which draws through a grid. Sorry, this is not a bilateral grid. Draws through a grid, so the eye of the painter can see through the grid and organize whatever is in reality regularly. And because there is a grid in place, this representation becomes true, becomes the correct way of representing. So then, and then it almost projects back, I think that reality goes before becomes more distance. And then in painting, this issue of perspective and depth finds the first two or three steps. You know, the Impressionists and just before him, Cézanne have think of light rather than drawing a figure. Then you have Cubism that thinks, how can I represent what's at the back of the image? So that I don't see, but I know is there. So there is an element of rationality that comes into the visual. And then you get to the last step of the abstract expressionists in the 50s that blurred the distance between figure and background. And that is precisely the relationship that is between us as instances in time and a supposed essence. There is no longer background or solid ground or support on which we are placed like a stage, but is a continuous fluid back and forth. And after these passaging steps, probably we'd simplify a century of development or of visual methods, then a lot of artwork goes directly at the shape of discourse. The material become how discourse is set. Duchamp that you brought up earlier, the whole work of Dada that take in the issue of the authenticity and the authorship. So there is ready-made stuff that were not made as art pieces, taken and used in collages, all these things, multiplication. Then next to that, then painting is no longer, or painting or sculpture are no longer the only thing, because there is the whole issue of the so-called new media communication. The old Benjamin line that discusses reproducibility comes along. So there is a new vector that comes in, which simply does not comply with the idea that art stays within a frame. Or does it? Because photography uses a frame, film uses frames, and the idea of frames remains so ingrained in our mind that even digital, which does not technically use frames, is still organized through frames. So you see how you have, or we have vectors or continuities that spread upon different different technologies, different modes of working, different moments in times, and go past, way past the moment where allegedly they might have had a direct link with reality. If we think of photography, I always find extremely interesting how digital photography uses a language that refers to analog photography. And most digital cameras imitate what analog cameras were, to the point that now there are new digital cameras that look like old cameras. Then the old phenomenon called skeuomorphism, where digital, or the old Instagrams, whatever, that imitates old film, which is a very conservative backward move. But beside that comment, it is as if the use of photography denies the potential of digital and just uses it as a neutral support. So And instead, with digital, one can do endless other things, like some of, no, that was still film, actually. The vector of those, the aesthetic of those images has remained across the technology, in this case technical material technology, not the way Heidegger describes it, that produced that aesthetic and went past it. So you have a frame that doesn't match the image in the frame somehow. It is misaligned, or the frame that does not, or a mode of working that does not match its technology or its content. But the interesting thing is that if in the case of photography, maybe there is a bit of resistance to the change, or digital it is really used as a standing reserve because it is just meant to represent all photography. In other instances, it's precisely the material of art where one can play with these discrepancies and misalignment and find very interesting tensions. Does it start making sense, this idea of having several things that happen at the same time? Then?
I was just thinking to answer my own question, I shouldn't use terms like reality, should I, in a group of philosophers, but what I refer to as reality is just another hypothesis, really, just another sort of statement in Foucault's terms.
Well, I thought that reality is not a hypothesis. When he speaks of the units of discourse, or the formations of discourse, I don't remember which page it is now on, but he makes the point, it's in the second paragraph of the chapter, he makes the point that these are not outside or before the discourse, but they are at the limit of the discourse. And what he means by this is that there is, like in Heidegger, there is no longer much of a point in talking about what's beyond or outside or before. Or there is no longer the point of speaking of an origin of the historical flow, or of an essence or a meaning of the art piece. Rather, is that the way one works, or the dimensions, or the method one applies for organizing history, are at the living, as in they are what gives shape to otherwise data that is raw to such a degree that has no meaning. Going back to photography, the raw data gathered by a camera, it's unreadable. It's numbers, zeros or one. How many filters in algorithms are there that turn that zeros and one into an image of the sunset? It's extremely complex what happens in between the two things. Now, there is an article written by a student that just got his PhD with Johnny last year, that says that data could be turned into music, could be turned into information to run a factory, could be turned into any other kind of organization, because it is completely undecidable. There are so many layers in between that organize that data, and that shapes the reality we receive. Makes sense? Do I answer your question? But it does make sense for everybody else too. The idea that the units of discourse, the function of the discourse itself, is at the limit as it shapes the way we interact. And if the discourse keeps saying that artists paint, it's going to be very, very difficult to be accepted doing something else. If the discourse say that, you know, men love women and women love men and nothing else, any other form will be rejected and condemned. If the discourse says that we have to grow economically, the system will eat the territory away, building houses and building factories, because that's what we think we are supposed to do. In this case, in this sense, one can speak of dimensions, because these are really sort of shapes that curve the reality. And there is no outside of it where you can stand and say, oh, actually that's wrong, or that's right, or something else. One is in it. And Heidegger speaks of it as in Dasein, being in there. One is always in there. There is no a priori external moment. And therefore it becomes a very delicate process, the one of realizing from being in there how the game is functioning. But that's being artist is precisely one is in there, you start trying, and then you find ways to mix the fabric and the wire, you find ways to turn your experiment and the computer into a sound that stimulates you and so forth, and somebody else who paints find ways to work with the history of painting, the pleasure of painting, and whatever they were trying to paint that day into something that stays together. It's got a lot of tension, enough interest, curiosity, it relaunches more desire to paint, and therefore it is a valuable piece. As this made, because Johnny told me to bridge between the two, is Heidegger become a bit clearer? This I mean, I didn't go because I don't know if you had read or will read more of his work later. So this is a specific text where he uses this very cloudy expressions all the time, and he's very creative with language. Actually, you could say that he already his way of working language is precisely these horizontal games. It's very artistic in a way because he uses a lot of old expressions, but in traditional German, which then obviously we have here translated, it becomes difficult to grasp fully, to feel what they really mean. Plus a lot of ancient Greek, which he forces quite a bit at times in its meaning to the extreme. But the idea that comes out of it is, if things come to presence, that's the last bit we can think of. If the world comes to presence to us, and we are in this process of receiving, being challenged by this coming to presence. Now, follow this. Coming to presence, something is present, is here now, this book is present to us, so it is in space and time. At the beginning of the text, he speaks of a couple of expressions I can't pronounce without reading. Aesthesis, apophanstai. These are Greek, page 8. Apophanestai. It's a Greek word which means to come to the surface, to the threshold of perception. Now, esthai is the same root of aesthetic. So this is why this text opens up to the idea of, to the art making, because to Heidegger, what is coming forth, is emerging, that challenging us, takes up a body, takes up a shape one way or another. But it doesn't do it without our response. So things come toward us in this poetic, creative mood and challenge us to react. And in this coming toward us and in our reaction, shape takes place. Since you asked about the event before, the word Heidegger uses for event in German has one of the various inner meanings, the idea of taking place. But it's a taking place that is almost making place. As in, by coming into existence in one way rather than another, I do shape the present in one way rather than another. So much that I cannot speak of a pure, abstract, neutral present or place. I cannot think of space as a neutral stage that is just made out of the three coordinates on which then I will place cities, people, cultures, food, music, whatever. Everything is there, and actually space as a neutral 3D space is an abstraction. It's not a priori, it's actually pulled out afterwards. And these coming to presence as in apophanestai, of coming to the surface, to the threshold of perception, is really acquiring a body, taking up the shape, coming to exist in space and time, which is precisely what we also do when we're, even if our work is not material, even if what we do is ephemeral, or if it works with communication systems or expectations of media communication, whatever else, or music, that it is still taking and shaping the present in one way or another. So the whole problem of something that for both Heidegger and Foucault seemed epistemological, how do we organize reality, in their argument matches entirely the questions of aesthetics, which are at the bottom of artworks, art making, art thinking, art discourses. You seem convinced to a point.
I was just trying to. You're saying that the reaction to the coming to presence creates a shape or a form or a body, but previously I think we were talking about the reaction to that created a poetic moment.
Mm-hmm.
So is the poiesis and the body then the same thing?
The poiesis and the body. The poiesis means. I see why you think it's confusing. They're not the same thing as in the poiesis is a creative move that shouldn't be taken as if, or as in, there will be an agency somewhere that wants to create, as in, I want to create a sculpture, I want to make a film, I want to, whatever. It's not that. It's that this interaction, this accepting the challenge and responding to it, creates the world we are in, its meaning, its sense, its distribution. At times that can be 3D material, other times is just the tension of how you react to the master, and we get out at the end of the year, or the 2 years you do part-time, changes you, changes the art scene in Birmingham, by a lot, by a little, that doesn't matter, but it changes the distribution, it changes the balance. There will be more artists that are more committed to work, that have started thinking in different terms than they did before, and so this has created a new equilibrium, if you like, or altered the existing equilibrium. In this sense, the gaining the body or the poiesis that is in creating are two sides of the same thing, or two sides of this movement that Heidegger speaks about. No, you're not clear.
I don't know, I'm going to have to think about it.
If coming forth by itself somehow goes wasted, is take it with very, very long ranks, is like pure energy without being shaped. It's not a lump of matter or a lump of intention, but it is so without definition that it is not, because it's got no definition whatsoever. It's no quality, it's ease and nothing else. You wouldn't be able to hold electricity in any form in your hands, and the most it would be burned, and that's it. If you package it in a battery, in a system, through this kind of light or that kind of light, you get different form of light, different shades, different hues. This is neon and is white with a shade of green. That will probably be yellow. Some other halogens are pink. Gives a different light. So you give a slant to what this motion, this coming forth, and that slant or that cut into it starts giving it a character.
So the cut being the way it's, how it expresses itself. So it expresses itself as a greenish neon light.
Yes.
Or a yellowish tungsten.
Yes. But think of the fact that if we turn the light off in this room, this pink, this blue, this white, all these colors would disappear. You need the material, the light hits it, the wave comes back to us at a certain wavelength and is perceived as a color or another.
And the colour is embodied.
Yes.
Without all
But also, if you take the light away, unless I bump into you, you don't even perceive the body from here. But it's in total darkness. You wouldn't be there until I hit you while walking towards you. So there are it's delicate to make such a material example of this argument. But if we go back to the description of being, I am being boring, I am being annoying, I am being funny, I am whatever, but I am being something. And then I just be. I exist with no further definition. Pure existence hasn't got any body, hasn't got any shape, any character, any funny Italian accent when it speaks. No, it probably doesn't even speak because it is just existence. It doesn't even have a mouth and a tongue. It needs to be defined into shape in time and space to be able to get the color, a flavor, a taste, character, pleasure, and nastiness. Are you familiar with the very, very early work of Bruce Nauman? He finishes art school, he hires an immense studio and has a video camera, and he doesn't know what to do with himself. And probably was reading Beckett at the time. So I started thinking, well, you know what, I walk like Beckett. And he films himself walking with stiff legs around the studio. And he goes round and round and round quite a few times. And it starts a whole new, he's one of the first artists that blurs the distinction between conceptual performance and installation. And then he goes on working on about different things, but at the beginning he's just asking himself, what am I doing? And there is no description, there is no limit. He can do anything he wants. He just finished art school, he finished the master, he's got the video camera, and he's in a barren, huge studio with white walls and nothing on the floor, nothing else. So you got himself and the camera. So the studio becomes a stage, and the image of the artist becomes the material he works with. The next piece is the famous photograph where he's spitting water out of his mouth, and he titles the self-portrait of the artist as a fountain, obviously referring directly to Bruce Nauman, to Duchamp fountain. So he shifts from the art object to the artist. But in that step, at the beginning where he decides that he's going to film himself walking about like Beckett, he goes from an endless array of possibilities which are nothing, and we all know what it means to stand in front of a blank sheet, blank canvas, or blank whatever he's been working on, to reducing it to these small things, and immediately that takes a character, and you can take it, you can grasp it, you can start working with it. Therefore, to get to that point, you needed to get it to have a body, one way or another.
And then he enframes it as well.
Yes, but he does not enframe it as it is presented here. As enframing is unique as it's not one-off, but no, is the way to do it. He has precisely to break away from one way of doing it, accepted as the only way of doing it. He's not taking an easel, a canvas, and colors and brushes in the studio. And he's not taking the video camera either to document things as traditionally cameras are supposed to be used for. He's in there and tries to find the relationship between the camera and himself and the space he has. So that triangle, if you like, are the dimensions of the work. In that sense, the coming forth or calling forth and being challenged creates a body, creates a place, if you like, or a time and place. makes more sense now?
I think it does, yeah. I'm still a bit fuzzy on where the poiesis then sits.
Well, this process is it not, poiesis is not poetic, it's poietic. It means it's making. Now, the fact that that making can be poetic is a further step down the line, but the making is creative. Is creating, even before creating something that is directly or simply art, create time and place, creates the reality of the brain.
Sorry to interrupt, but then, so the reaction is actually the poiesis, and the poiesis or the reaction
No,
brings forth
don't
the
leave it only on one side. This is the poiesis.
There isn't really a reaction.
There are two stands. One is, would you like to explain?
No, well, I'll just, there isn't really reaction with that kind of, the point of bringing forth and also within being and what comes out of that. So all of the vectors that come into that section of bringing forth are there to then move into poiesis, or you just, the small B, the big B being, that's big B being there at that point of bringing forth. And all of the vectors that are coming into that actually creates the small b being and then the movement into poiesis.
So one goes like this and the other one goes like that. They never fully reach each other. A small being, my small self, the 28th of January 2014, will never reach the essence of humanity or the meaning of the word. The more I look for it, the less I find it. And B or big B being will never be found entirely in any of us because it is obviously far bigger than any single instance. It is infinite. It is the infinity of the
So
world.
then, if my understanding is correct, the possibilities are endless. And if I substitute myself, if I use D&G's arboreal philosophy with a tree, and I see myself as the acorn, I can say, well, I don't want to be the acorn anymore. I want to be something different. I want to do something different with that. That's how I'm seeing it.
Yes, although obviously it's not easy to make that side step.
Yeah, I know.
The arboreal philosophy is precisely the one that thinks that being, this is the nice big tree, this is the trunk, is rooted in being.
Yeah.
And all the small b here, like what fruit is going to be? Berries, are up there. But and this is precisely the tree is the framing for Heidegger. It's very well put this link. And framing as in the reality we are in is actually organized like this, and that's the way it is. It's not an image, it's not an interpretation. While what he points out is that this is an image. And we are using this image to organize our world. And this is preventing us an authentic relationship with the world. And he uses the expression authentic as technical terms. And this is why it's been criticized, because they are telling, well, actually, you get to authenticity. And we are just repeating the same game with different words. Foucault instead abandons entirely the notion of an authentic relationship with the world and says, just let it be multi-values, or going various directions at the same time. Do not curtail it in one single identity form. So this is why he is saying that it does not reject the unit of discourse. It would be foolish and impossible to act on a blank slate. But one has to see that they are not always valid. One has to notice where there are others coming in, where they are splitting, where they break down, and they have domino turns. So what was belonging to one way of working in painting can now be found in cinema, and painting has borrowed from cinematic imagery and aesthetic, and it has become comics or cartoons or I use cinema shapes. All these things go across and flow into each other and keep breaking down the original frame that we thought they had. So the point is that there is no longer one distribution that is solid and rigid and true, but it you can look at it at various sub-levels, and the sub-levels go across boundaries. And for Foucault, it's a problem of individual identities. He says that having these big frames of mind, these big forms of framing, is the structure that that supports, is at the base of the radical unity of the subject that he has problems with. That the individual is a solid unit and it's fixed identity, while we all know that we are more than one thing at the same time. There are so many elements that constitute ourselves, and not all compatible either, as well. So it's, then with this we'll open up to all these arguments and discussion on how sexuality is built and designed and created, how the citizens are shaped through forms of discipline, of the notion of docile body, the fact that politics shapes and give ways of moving to us, literally. But that's going too far. Is this link clear now between the two? How it moves? The notion of discourse organizes reality, and there is no outsider discourse. But at the same time, what they are trying to do, Foucault uses the expression paradoxical situation there. What they are trying to do is to show that the discourse is not whole, or is not whole, so it's both not whole as W-H-O-L-E, and it's not whole A-double-L. So you can, and yet it is at the limit, it is the horizon of our world. So it is, this is why the expression that Heidegger uses, dwelling on this threshold, becomes very important. It is not all there is, but it is at the same time is the horizon, is the limit of our universe. And if you then take it home now, that this could be the definition of art. And it's not all that there is, but it is the limit of what has been accepted as art so far. And you see how being inventive, it's really a challenging, daring, potentially risky position at times. Because you really place yourself at the far edge of what has been done, and you want to extend it. Even if you're just working for your own pleasure, which is not an hedonistic position at all, it's a very serious one. We've got 5-10 more minutes if you have questions. I hope it was clear enough. And I haven't confused you even more about Heidegger. Okay. I hope again to
It's in the first version of the it's identity.